What's up, everybody? This is Frank from Fam Sports New York, and for this video, we're going to be talking about our Week 1 preview for Section 1A and 1AA football. Super excited as we get, last week was in our Week 0, diving now into the regular season Week 1. And again, want to welcome our audience. Really appreciate you guys for joining, as always. And I know that normally we would have a show separating the different groups, but for this year, we're actually going to decide to do a big schools and a small schools when we do our previews. And there's for a few reasons, right? You know us, we love to have a good time covering football. We think we bring a nice different niche on covering the football, complementary to Low HUD and guys like Kevin Devaney who cover it, bring kind of like an analysis type of view, film work type of view and stuff like that. But this is also our second job, right? And so we do have to do a little bit of consolidating for time purposes, especially to work on producing some of the content that we want to produce. So it's really big for us to consolidate. We really do appreciate it. We want to bring you the high quality coverage that we always do, but just wanted to kind of make that announcement. And also talking about, our Patreon group, which we have for a couple videos now, introducing some new material for them. So our weekly reviews, going over the different games on what happened, that is for our Patreon members. And also we're adding, based on the tier that you get or go sign up for, we're going to be doing some class rankings. So some of the top schools in each class. And as the season goes along, we'll start adding offensive line, offense, and defense. So wanted to give that announcement. And how this video is going to work, guys, we're going to talk about all the different games on schedule. We're going to preview 5 of them between the two, between 1A and 1AA. Preview the top 5 games, and then we're going to pick all the games. So we are going to touch on everything. So let's start diving into it. On the A side, this is kind of like a big non-league week, right? So you have Greeley at Fox Lane on a Thursday. I hate these Thursday games, by the way. Makes it hard to put out the coverage you want. But we have Greeley 1-0 at Fox Lane, who's 0-0, non-league game. We have Pelham at Brewster in a non-league game. So these are all non-league, right? So Pelham at Brewster. You have Yorktown at Clarkstown North. You have Mahopac at Harrison in the rematch from their playoffs last year. We have Clarkstown South at Somers and John Jay Cross River at Eastchester. So all those games, you have one on Thursday, which was Greeley at Fox Lane. The rest of the games Friday, and then one game on Saturday, which is Cross River at Eastchester. On the AA side, you have Scarsdale at Arlington, which is a league game. You have White Plains at Carmel, which is a league game. Suffern at New Rochelle is a league game. Mamaroneck at North Rockland is a league game. And you have Ketchum at Mount Vernon is a league game. John Jay East Fishkill at Ossining, which is a league game. And the one that's not league is the big rivalry between the Yonkers schools. Yonkers Forest at Yonkers Brave, which is a non-league game. And just for some clarity, you can catch a bunch of these games on Local Live. Greeley at Fox Lane, Pelham at Brewster, Yorktown at Clarkstown North, Mahopac at Harrison, South at Somers, Scarsdale at Arlington, White Plains at Carmel, Mamaroneck at North Rockland. I mean, Local Live is such an important vital role that you can catch a bunch of these games, which are so important for guys like me. But let's go break down a couple of these. And the first one I want to start is a AA game, Yonkers Forest at Yonkers Brave. This big annual rivalry between the Yonkers schools and the Yonkers programs. Yonkers Forest is 1-0 at Yonkers Brave, who is 0-1. Now, Yonkers Forest has won 3 straight in this rivalry, including last year, which was a huge blowout. Now, I'm going to say this. I think this game will be much more competitive this year. But let's start on the Yonkers Forest side. I thought they had a dominant performance last week against Magnus, and that 2-quarterback system that they have offensively with Nazir Fields, who had 3 touchdowns. John Valerio had a rushing touchdown. This is the method they want to go with. So I'm interested to see another week with these these quarterbacks. And, some of them, both of them show that they can run the ball. It's a consistency passing, which I think Fields shows. Ben Stevens had a receiving touchdown. You have Angel Aquino and Jacob Henry, right? So Yonkers Forest has a bunch of these receivers that they're going to be looking to try to make some big plays, right? And so with that pressure that they give you so much with the deep ball, it really opens things up underneath and allows you to run the ball because the defensive backs have to play so far out. So I'm definitely going to see them try to test with their big play receivers. We're going to be super important in this one, in this 2-quarterback system, probably opening up things to run the football for them. So definitely keep an eye on that. But defensively, you got to keep containing. Yonkers Brave had some huge plays last week getting to the outside. So Yonkers Forest is going to have to be really sound out on the edge and preventing those big plays from Yonkers Brave if they want to win this game. Going to Yonkers Brave last week, they lost to St. Dom's, but the offense I thought was pretty balanced. They had about 253 yards of offense, 151 on the ground, 102 in the air. Big plays out on the edge, and again, I mentioned that in the previous one talking about Forest. That's going to be key for them this week. Getting out on the edge, I do think offensive line-wise, Yonkers Forest could give them some trouble with their D-line. But getting out on the edge is going to be super important, protecting their quarterback. And they had some nice plays offensively. Look at the continue spreading it out, making some quick, decisive throws, even some deep concepts, and having the quarterback scramble is going to be a big one. Defensively, they forced a couple turnovers last week. Preventing the big play from these big play wide receivers is going to be so important. And trying to create some turnovers. They had an interception, fumble recovery. They had a couple sacks last week. This defensive line is going to have to create a lot of pressure up front for these quarterbacks. And these DBs have so much pressure on them to keep these plays in front of them. Tackling is going to be so important. Look for a guy like Jaden Rush for me on the defensive line to try to create some pressure. For the matchup for this game, the big one I'm focusing on is the Yonkers Forest wide receivers I mentioned. Angel Aquino, Jacob Henry, versus this Yonkers Brave DBs. It's going to be so important for them to keep everything in front. If they start giving up one or two long touchdowns, it's backbreaking for a defense, and they have the ability to speed to do that. So keep an eye on those guys. Let's go to our next matchup, which is an A matchup and a rematch of last year's quarters, which is Mahopac 1-0 at Harrison, who's 1-0. This is an A matchup, non-league game. Last year, Harrison won in the quarter playoffs 20-19 in a physical back-and-forth game. Mahopac, what I'll say is that there definitely feels like there's some disdain and resentment between the two programs. Mahopac had some injuries last year. I remember at the end, there was some, talk about the referees jobbing Mahopac. We have Harrison, who I don't think got a lot of respect for that win. So it's going to be such an interesting dynamic. And going into this game, you could tell that there is definitely some revenge on the mind of Mahopac right at the media day to speak to the captains. And the worst question I ever get if I'm a coach, when I hate when the kids are asked this, what game are you looking for the most, right? So they asked the captains which game. I think it was 2 or 3 of the captains on Mahopac mentioned Harrison by name, right? So they feel that they could have won the game. They got revenge on their mind. I can't imagine that quote not going through the Harrison locker room. So you're going to see, I think, some sparks flying in this one. But let's start with Mahopac. And they won handily last week versus Goshen. And it really starts with the running game. And I think that's going to be so important for them this season, and it's obviously offense is going to run through Danny Koch, right? He had 111 yards last week, 2 touchdowns. The passing game was a little inconsistent, but relying on the run game does open things up. And as the season goes on, we'll probably get more comfortable. And thrown into a guy like Nate Maskell, who had a really strong week last week, had a receiving touchdown and forced a turnover as well. And I think this offensive line, again, very inexperienced, but I do think they have some size to them, right? So going up against Harrison, which doesn't have a lot of bodies, can they try to rely on the run game, control the tempo of the clock, and then play action out of that is going to be big. On the defensive side, they were led really last week by Owen Ryan, who had 2 sacks, 12 tackles. You're going to see Mahopac tried to bring pressure and test the mobility of Harrison's quarterback, I would imagine, and try to press these receivers, try to have the quarterback hold onto the ball long enough so that they can create some turnovers, create some big plays. They did that last week, forcing a couple turnovers is going to be big. On the Harrison side, the big question, huge win versus Rye, right? How do they respond? And the big thing is health to me. A couple guys got banged up, including their quarterback. Guys that struggled with, cramps. They don't have a big roster, right? So how do they respond after this Rye victory? At times you can feel like the gas, the air has been let out after that huge win. It's an emotional win. The second week could be very dangerous. But last year they propelled Harrison after that Rye game. Can they do it again this year? I do think the starters have some big-time upside. And let's start offensively with that quarterback, Marco Citro. He was such a gritty performance. 2 passing touchdowns last week. Got hurt, missed a couple quarters, gutted it out. Ankles don't heal that fast, right? So he's definitely going to, we're going to see his availability and his mobility on this game. But I think they're going to have to, again, show some balance. Because when he left, the offense really sputtered, right? And it's not a knock on any of the other guys, but he's so important to the passing game that it's going to be huge to see what he can do. And I do think what could really help when you have a quarterback lacking mobility is their ability to run the football. And so I'm looking at this offensive line opening up lanes to run the ball for guys like Barcella, Krupe, Lanza. Like, they need these running backs to make some plays for them, to take some relief off the quarterback side. And this offensive line is really going to have to step up big time if Harrison wants to win this game. Running the ball is going to be so important. It was a bit of a struggle at times last week. This time around, they're going to need to run the ball better. And then that'll open up things to guys like McLaurin, right, who had a long receiving touchdown, and some of the other wide receivers off of play action. So running the ball is going to be so important. Again, this offensive line is going to be key. Defensively, the number one thing is obviously slowing down Koch, right? That's going to be the number one focus, getting them into second and third and long, and then can this defensive line create some pressure for them up front. And, guys like on this defensive line, I mentioned the O-line, it's also this D-line, Santarella, Belidamage, Nicolaj. They had some strong performances last week versus Rye. They need to dominate up front if Harrison's going to win this game. This is a very dangerous game for them. This defensive line is going to have to make plays, and they're going to have to rely on this defensive backfield to kind of go into some man coverage at times against these receivers, right? Because they have to slow down the running game. And so McLaurin and Krupe, they're going to have to make some plays in the secondary. And again, it's really going to have to be a group effort for this Harrison team that doesn't have a lot of bodies. So we're going to see, very interesting, the matchup to me. Looking at the quarterback spot for Harrison and Marco Citro versus the DBs in Mahopac, I'm going to imagine they're going to try to test the quarterback, his accuracy, his mobility. They're going to challenge these receivers. Can he maneuver? Can he make the correct reads and the right throws? Let's go to the next game, another A matchup. John Jay Cross River, 1-0 at Eastchester, who is 0-1. This is a non-league game. John Jay is 2-1 versus Eastchester over their last three matchups, including a win last year, which was a close game for a while, which kind of knocked Eastchester out of the playoff run. So this was, again, another very interesting matchup here. This time, last year was at Cross River. This time it's at Eastchester. And let's start with Cross River. Offensively, Tommy Machado had a pretty darn good start. I did have that INT, but 17 of 27 for 236 yards and a touchdown. Also 48 yards rushing and a touchdown. Strong opening performance by him. This rushing offense also had over 150 yards on the ground. And that's with help from guys like Luca Duva, who had 90 yards and a touchdown, also 41 yards receiving, and Cam Worrell. So these guys are not very big guys, but they were big contributors last week for this offense. And running east and west is the game that Cross River wants to play. They got the guys like Jack Marcolise. He had 3 catches for 66 yards. Patty Ryan was another guy who made some plays for them. Eastchester gave up some big yards on the ground last week. So, again, it's not going to be about power football, but running east and west on them. Look for them to try to get the running game going again for Cross River. I'm interested to see how this offensive line holds up. If they could stay in front of the chains, they'd like to play fast. How do they handle against the D-line of Eastchester? Defensively, 2 INTs last week. Dom Savastano had a pick 6. Jack Marcolise had that INT at the end of the game. This is not a very big defense, but an active defense and fast defense. The DBs, I thought, had a strong game. James Arfeege was another one. In the pass attack, they were pretty darn strong, and this linebacker group can run, right? But how can they handle a downhill running attack? Can Eastchester do that against them is going to be key, right? So they gave up some big runs last week. We'll see that, how this defense holds up. If Eastchester wants to impose some strength to them is going to be the big key. Looking at Eastchester now, offensively, getting more and more comfortable. There were some good signs last week. There were some, not so good signs. And with the quarterback, more and more reps is going to be important. So Aiden Schultz, who, again, using that dual threat ability that he has, I thought he made some nice reads and nice throws last week. Using his legs, using his arm is going to be so important to keep the defense off balance. And again, Jaden Brunner, he had 2 rushing touchdowns last week. Kieran McCloskey also had a strong performance as a wide receiver. Pretty shifty guy, was kind of the main target in the passing game last week. But they got to run the ball, and they got to run the ball with some physicality. And if you watch Brewster, we're able to get some big chunk plays out of the run game. Eastchester's going to have to do similar, right? They're going to have to run downhill. They don't want to get into an east and west game with John Jay Cross River, with the skill guys that they have. I don't think that's the right way to attack it. They got to get some consistency in the run game and then opening up things in the back end, in the passing game in the back end. They got to get these DBs honest for John Jay Cross River. Defensively, again, they gave up way too many yards in the running game last week. I'm looking at this defensive line, right? Guys like Mannion, can they generate pressure up front? Can they dominate up front? And this linebacker core running with these Cross River guys, off tackle or toward the outside is going to be so important. They got to be able to generate some pressure. That's what got Cross River into trouble. When pressure came, that's when the turnovers came, right? So it's going to be so important to generate that pressure. This D-line's got to be physical. They got to get after it. They got to dominate in the trenches if Eastchester wants to win this game. So I'm looking at these, they're going to help their DBs out by winning up front, right? Because the skill guys across River are very talented. So we're going to see that. The matchup, looking at this Cross River offensive line handling this Eastchester defensive line, who's going to win that matchup is going to be huge. All right, let's go to the next matchup. Double A Mamaroneck 0-0 at North Rockland, who's 1-0. This is a league game. This is on Local Live. Very interested to see this. North Rockland historically 9-1 versus Mamaroneck, but last year Mamaroneck won 21-7, which was a close game again for a while, and this was at North Rockland. So Mamaroneck got the last laugh this last time. Let's see what happens this time around, and let's start with the road team, Mamaroneck. So many guys you have to replace, so many question marks on Mamaroneck at this offensive side of the ball. I'm looking at the quarterback spot first, Henry Mackey. How does he respond? How does he play in this first game? How does the quarterback situation look in this first game? Now, what could help them is the guys up front. That's where they're returning 3 out of 5 guys. Guys like Nick Lamagna is going to have to step up. This offensive line is going to have to dominate, and trying to rely on the run game with a couple different backs could be something that can help a quarterback get his feet underneath him, right? So running the ball would help in a huge matter in that spread scheme. So we're going to see on that end. Defensively, the number one thing is stopping the run game for Mamaroneck. North Rockland showed last week they can run the ball at a very high level. The offense started off slow, but they started to really run the ball very well, and that's got to be the number one thing. And I'm looking at these linebackers for Mamaroneck, which is a huge part of their team, guys like TJ Smith, Mika Berry-Thous. These are guys going to have to be super active on the defensive side of the ball. They got to slow down the rush attack, put the ball in the quarterback's hands, force him to beat you throwing the ball. Going to North Rockland, last week they had a huge comeback win versus Monroe Woodbury. They were down a couple scores. And again, it's kind of expected offensively to start off slow. New quarterback, new offensive line. But what they did, they went with what worked in the second half, which was their biggest strength, which is running the football. Giving a guy like Gamey Savor 173 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. Offensive line really started to open things up. But we're going to see, can the quarterback make some bigger plays? Can the passing game get a little more, create some bigger plays overall? Anthony Hamilton, a 10 of 11, right? So very efficient, only 83 yards, right? So again, they didn't ask a lot of them. If the run game starts off slow, if the offense starts off slow, will they take more chances? Can they execute some big plays offensively? Defensively, I was really impressed for pretty much the whole game. I mean, I know they gave up a couple scores, but shutout in the second half. The defensive group really ran to the ball, and again, going up against a young quarterback, get him into second and third and longs. Mamaroneck is going to be so big for them. And guys like Jaden Harrison at the linebacker spot had 11 tackles. Jahir McLean had 10 tackles. Tristan Velt had 7 tackles. And they made plays on the back end. Guys like Farrar, King St. LaFleur also had an INT. So I'm looking at this defense. If they can get Mamaroneck in second, third, and longs, challenge these receivers. Have a whole bunch of new receivers coming in, and see if they can make some plays in the passing game, forcing some turnovers. The matchup, got to look at the running backs for North Rockland versus this linebacking core of Mamaroneck. It's going to be such an interesting matchup to watch in this one. Finally, guys, the last game that we're going to be previewing before we get to game picks is our game of the week in a Clarkstown South 0-0 at Somers, who's 0-1. This is a non-league game. They have not played each other, I think, since before 2004. And really, really interesting matchup here. And I'm going to start with Clarkstown South, who's had real strong success these last few years, won a lot of games. But last week, when you watch the game versus Somers, Ramapo, and again, this is a very different team than kind of a big-time school in New Jersey, they had some success passing the ball against Somers and creating some big plays in the passing game versus Somers. So, to me, I'm on Clarkstown South. It's going to start at the quarterback spot with their quarterback Colin Holder, right? It's going to be so important that they can generate some big plays in the passing game, because running the ball consistently is going to be tough against this Somers team, right? Because of the guys they have on that defensive line. Can they generate some big plays? Who are going to be some of these new receivers that can make some big plays for them in the passing game? I think it's going to be so important here. Can they win the one-on-one matchups? They're going to bring a lot of pressure. The quarterback for South has to be very smart where he goes with the football, where the pressure's coming. Get rid of the ball when he needs to get rid of the ball. Throw it away if it's not there. Don't force things that aren't there. And I'm looking at this offensive line, right? William Zamparelli is going to have to help lead the way for this Clarkstown South offensive line. How do they hold up against the pressure? Somers had 5 sacks last week, so they know how to generate a lot of pressure on your quarterback. They're going to have to hold up really well. Defensively, number one thing is got to be slow down this run game, right? Somers showed that they can really run the ball last week. Those big guys up front can move people. They're big. They're physical. That's going to be the number one thing. Second thing is then generating that pressure, right? So number one is getting them in long down. Second thing is, can they generate some pressure, put their quarterback in a bad situation? I'm looking at Kevin Butler at the linebacker spot. So important for the team on both sides of the ball, but he's going to have to really lead the charge, stopping this dangerous rush attack of Somers, but he's not the only one. Carson Crisp, Kyle Sparing, going to be so important. Again, this is a full group effort. It's going to be tough for that D lineman with the physicality and size of Somers up front. These linebackers really going to have to be running and making some plays. Defensive backs too, against, again, the play action out of Somers is going to be so important. Keeping their quarterback in the pocket is also going to be very important as well. When I look at Somers, how are they going to respond to that really tough loss is kind of the big question. Is it going to linger? Is it going to kind of motivate them, right? So I would imagine, again, it was tough to swallow, but how do we move forward? Now we're getting into, again, our games against our league. So can they rebound very quickly to a very tough loss? Now offensively, listen, I thought the offensive line had a pretty darn strong performance, opening up things in the running game for some big plays, at times having really good pass protection. Their quarterback, Max Sullivan, I know there were some turnovers, but he also had 3 touchdowns last week. This is a big, strong quarterback. And with more and more reps, I think he's going to get more and more comfortable in this offense, and you're going to see more and more dynamic plays from him. But to me, protecting the ball is going to be so important. It's what killed them at times last week. Protecting the ball is going to be huge, and running the ball. And we saw a real show by a couple of their backs. Mason Kelly being one of them, had over 130 yards rushing, and Palazzolo is another guy. So those two guys combined had over 280 yards of offense between the two and multiple touchdowns. So you're seeing two guys who can probably become stars as the season goes along. Keep an eye on those two guys continuing to make plays in this offense and being a vital part of this offense. Defensively, I mentioned, this is a defense that can generate a lot of pressure. They did give up some big plays in the passing game, so this secondary really needs to step up this week. Again, preventing those giant plays in the passing game and quarterback runs, right? So those are going to be so important. This defense had 5 sacks. Look for this defensive line to be physical. Again, look for some stunts coming. They're probably going to get into some man coverage when they're trying to bring that pressure. But again, if the DBs can hold up physically, I do think they can generate some turnovers, right? This is going to be, again, they already played last week. South did not play, so this is their first game coming in. You can imagine there's going to be some mistakes. Somers is ready to go, right? So this could be a big opportunity for them. The matchup I'm looking at, this Somers offensive line versus this Clarkstown South D-line. You saw the big physical play from that O-line. The D-line for South is very new, right? So I'm interested to see what that looks like coming this round. And the player to watch, to me, the quarterback, Colin Holder for Clarkstown South. If they're going to pull off this kind of upset, we know about guys like Kevin Butler, but it's the other guys, the unknown guys, the new guys coming in, going to have huge performances for them to win and on the road. So that's going to be huge. That's my player to watch. All right, guys, let's go to the game picks, right? And, a big thing for me is getting over 75% of my picks correct, right? That's a big focus for me. I put in a lot of work with these picks. I always like to have some fun. I know the programs watch this. They like to poke fun when I don't pick them, or if I do pick them, cheering on, which is all good and fun. I also like to have a little fun competition. I keep track of what Aloha does. And my partner, Mars, who usually is here, he's been with me all last year, but again, some personal things, some work-related things. He can't be here this week, but he will be making his return. So don't worry for our fans out there. Mars will make his return. But let's dive into the games, guys. First off, let's talk about a Thursday game. A game, Greeley 1-0 at Fox Lane, who's 0-0. This is an very interesting game for me. When I look at Greeley, they showed they have the skill guys to make a lot of big plays, but the question was up front. And those guys played relatively well last week. So, again, going against at Fox Lane on the road against some of the big guys up front, especially guys like Bailey, how does his offensive line hold up? Osh made some big plays. Blakesley made some huge plays. Edenbaum's another running back. This offense can really get churning. So, again, where Fox Lane kind of struggled when I watched it at camp is getting out on the edge, again, contain, and some pass plays. So this really could probably make some big plays in the passing game this week. But when I look at Fox Lane, I look at some of their big players like Minotti and Bailey. They could wreck games for you, right? These are big physical football players. I'm interested to see on the offensive line for Fox Lane how they come together, right? Testing a bunch of different guys out. These DBs out on the edge. I think these two teams are pretty evenly matched. But when these teams are evenly matched, I'm going to go with the home team in Fox Lane. I think they're going to make enough plays in the running game. They're going to control it, keep Greeley on the sideline offensively, and make enough plays to prevent those big plays from Blakesley on the outside is going to be so important. Look for Bailey to have a huge game in this one. I'm going to go with Fox Lane winning this one in a close one. Let's go to the next game. This is a double-A game. Scarsdale 0-0 at Arlington, who's 1-0. This is a league game. Scarsdale won versus Arlington at home last year in one of the biggest upsets of the season. Listen, when I look at Scarsdale, they're not very big, but they have athletic kids. They have scrappy kids. They did have some kids banged up when I saw them at the scrimmage. So interested to see how the team comes together, and they're going to try to use the option against Arlington to compensate for their lack of size. Again, interested to see the quarterback stuff, the running back stuff for Scarsdale, but they're going up against some big boys in Arlington, and they had an impressive win last week. Davenport and Rossignol had 7 touchdowns combined between the two of them. Really dominant performance. What I like is, again, the size we knew they always had, but the physicality. On the offensive line, they're going to be really outmatching Scarsdale up front. Scarsdale really has to use their speed here. But defensively is where Arlington, to me, if they're going to make a run, it starts with there. They made some big plays last week for them. I'm expecting some big plays this time around. Look for Arlington to get revenge from last year's loss. I'm going with Arlington. Let's go to the next game. This is an A matchup. Pelham 0-0 at Brewster, who's 0-1. This is a non-league game, and when I look at Pelham again, a lot of guys being replaced. The coach really emphasized this is now a next man up, and now guys who were behind the seniors last year, this is their time to shine. So I know Pelham's kind of an afterthought right now, but they kind of made themselves a staple in A. And how is this offensive line going to hold up against some of the very talented defensive players of Brewster, especially one of them, Derek Carlton, who was a menace last week? Interested to see, but I do think Pelham's going to try to attack the outside, right? Use their speed against Brewster. That did hurt Brewster at times last week against Cross River. A guy like Nick Massarelli could have a huge game, running the ball to the outside, throwing it to the outside in the return game. These are going to be some big ones, and a lot of maybe some unknown players who really step up. Now, the pass attack is going to be the key, right? I'm looking at these quarterbacks to see. And on the defensive side, defending the run is going to be huge. Brewster ran the ball pretty well last week, had some big run plays. So interested to see what's going to happen here. They did have some turnovers, so look for Pelham to try to attack them. On the Brewster side, I mentioned Derek Carlson, 2 sacks, a forced fumble. He forced a pressure that resulted in an INT. He was really dominant on the defensive line. He's going to have to be huge for them to win this game at home. Colin Lamaro, he had that INT. He was very active in the run game. This Brewster defense, again, had some really bright moments and some moments where they gave up some big plays at the bad time, right? But if this offense can prevent turnovers, which was a big one, they gave up a defensive touchdown, had the INT at the end, Brewster is really going to be in it, and it's going to be running the ball with Bari behind some of the size they have up front. We had a strong game last week. This is another tough game. Brewster has some solid size to him. Defensive players making some plays, but I am going to go with Pelham on the road to win this one. I think you're going to see some newcomers of Pelham make some giant leaps and some huge plays at the right time, and Nick Massarelli could be the huge X factor in this one with his speed. I'm going with Pelham. Let's go to the next game. This is White Plains 0-0 at Carmel, who's 0-0. They're a double-A matchup, league game. You look at White Plains, and again, a very young team coming in with a young quarterback. And when you have a young quarterback, you got to rely on the running game. Guys like Nick Sexton. And this offensive line who had a bunch of young players on it, sophomores, becoming juniors. How big of a jump is that for White Plains is going to be so important. We're going to see. But on the defensive side of the ball, stopping the run against Carmel is vital. And a guy like Luke Brooks, someone to keep an eye on for White Plains, is going to have a huge game for them to try to pull off an upset. And when I look at Carmel, again, starting their attack for a three-peat, they have the size and physicality. I think they're going to rely on it to run the football with Werlu, right? So you have a new quarterback stepping in, again, replacing a senior quarterback last year. This passing attack probably could take a little bit of time to get revved up and going, but their running game can really open things up. With their size and physicality, the play action pass to guys like Santiago is going to open up things. And defensively, look for them to bring a lot of pressure out on the edge. They can stop the run, get the ball in the young quarterback's hands, and that's when the turnovers can start to happen. I think the winning is going to be on Carmel's side because of the size and physicality in the defensive and offensive line. So I'm going with Carmel here. Let's go to the next game. This is an A matchup. Yorktown 1-0 at Clarkstown North, who's 0-0, non-league game. When I look at Yorktown, I was pretty impressed with their performance, especially for the first about 3 quarters. I know things kind of were slipping away in the fourth a little bit, but hanged on to win big. Starts with their quarterback Gonzalez, who was really strong last week, 13-19 for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, also ran the ball. And kind of this offensive line has some solid size to them. It's a mix between some size and some shorter, scrappy guys. You want to continue to see this offensive line grow and make plays in the running game, right? Guys like Del Vecchio Constantine, they ran the ball relatively well with over 140 yards, but at times there were some holes, right? There weren't holes, and the defense was able to make plays on them. So I want to see this offensive line continue to develop. They made some big plays in the passing game. Defensively, they like to generate a lot of pressure. I think 3 or more sacks last week. Look for that to try to continue, try to pressure Clarkstown North, who also has a lot of guys to replace. Clarkstown North, on the other hand, a bunch of new guys, the quarterback spot. Look for them to try to control the ball, keep the ball out of the passing attack of Yorktown, keep that offense on the sideline. And the big thing to me is going to be the guys up front, right? Patrick Banky, he's going to be helping lead that charge against a very aggressive defense. They like to bring a lot of pressure. They'll put their DBs on an island at times. So if they can hold up front, run the ball, get to the outside, and then play action off of that, could be huge. Now, to me, Clarkstown North is a big question mark. I'm going to go with Yorktown. I think Yorktown is one of the best teams in A. I think they're going to go on the road. They're going to win this game. Could be a statement type of game for them. Let's go to the next game. Double-A, Suffern 0-0 at New Rochelle High School, who's 0-1. This is a league game. I'm very interested in this one. This is a very tough game for me looking at it. I think Suffern has some pieces that can make some noise in that league over there. And New Rochelle, coming off of a tough loss, they have a lot of skill guys. They played Newburgh really tough for about a half before things pulled away. But starting off on Suffern, New Rochelle's offensive line had a bit of a struggle last week. And so I'm looking at their defense, guys like Shane Stallcup, to cause a lot of havoc up front for New Rochelle on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, Jeb Joseph is someone to keep an eye on running the ball. How does his offensive line handle kind of the young defensive line? There's a lot of speed in the back end, so if they just go back and try to throw the ball all over on them, they could spell some trouble for Suffern. So they're going to try to establish the run game is going to be so important. And for New Rochelle, we know with a bunch of guys being replaced on the O-line, new quarterback, it's going to take some time to develop, but they got to get the run game going a little bit better. I think they'll have a little bit more success running the football than they did last week. Because again, you have like 7 starters come back on the defense that held up pretty darn well. Back end is very strong. If you can slow down the run game, force them to start throwing the ball, that's where this fast defense can make some plays for you and maybe generate some turnover. Look for Taylor Rett to have a big game in this one. I am going to go with New Rochelle. Very close game. I'm going with the home team. I think it's going to be very tight for a while. New Rochelle pulls it off at the end. Another very close game to me is going to be this one. Double-A game, RCK at Mount Vernon. Both 0-0. This is a league game. I'm going to say this. I think you're going to see a much more competitive RCK team. They really struggled last year, bringing a bunch of guys back. James Eaglet is another guy who can make some plays for you running the football. Going up against Mount Vernon on the road. Mount Vernon's got some good size to them. Those big guys up front, can they move the ball at the point of attack? I think they will. I'm going to go with Mount Vernon here at home, running the football against them, preventing some big plays from RCK. But this is going to be another tight game. Would not shock me if it goes either way. But I'm going Mount Vernon. All right, let's go to the next game. This is a Double-A matchup. John Jay East Fishkill 1-0 at Ossining, who's 0-1. This is a league game as well. John Jay East Fishkill, when we talk about them, really focuses a lot on their quarterback, and Feliciano had 5 touchdowns last week. Really dominant performance by him. But I like that they, again, spread out to multiple different guys, but Feliciano is the orchestrator of this thing. I'm interested to see how the offensive line holds up against some of the speed up front of Ossining, especially a guy like Aiden Moore. If they can hold up really, really well, I do think they can hit some big plays. And I do think running the ball is going to be an interesting one for this week. But you saw last week, Greeley was able to hit some big pass plays on Ossining. Look for East Fishkill to try to take advantage of that. Defensively, stopping the run is going to be so big against Ossining, right? East Fishkill likes to blitz their linebackers. I'm expecting to see a bunch of that this week. Trying to get them in 2nd and 3rd and longs, where Ossining really puts a lot of pressure on their quarterback and the receivers to make some plays. And when I go to Ossining, preventing the big play is huge. That's what killed them against Greeley. They did make some big plays, forced some turnovers last week, but the big chunk plays really hurt them. They have to prevent that if they want to pull off this upset. Running the ball with LaFaro is going to be huge to control this game, but look for guys on defense. Aiden Moore on the defensive end spot. Gio Jean Pierre had a big INT near the goal line. They got to create some turnovers here because East Fishkill controlling the ball is going to cause a lot of trouble for them. I'm going to go with John Jay East Fishkill on this one. I think they win this game. I think it's close for a little while, and then East Fishkill starts pulling away towards the end. All right, guys, now let's going to break down and pick the games that we did previews for. First one is that Double-A game. Yonkers Force 1-0 at Yonkers Brave is 0-1. big rivalry, non-league game. We talked about it before. I'm going to go with Yonkers Forest. I think this game will be more competitive than it was last year, which was kind of a blowout, or not kind of, it was a blowout. Look for Yonkers Forest to hit some big plays in the passing game. I don't think Yonkers Brave offense is ahead enough to stay put with Yonkers Forest offensively. I'm going with Yonkers Forest. This is another very interesting A matchup. Mahopac 1-0 at Harrison, who's 1-0. Again, I talked about some of the animosity, some of the anger between the two teams. Harrison, what are they health-wise? This could be a scary game. I would not shock me if Mahopac pulls off the upset here, wins this game off of a Harrison team coming off a huge win versus Rye and getting beat up. So it's going to be really important. They don't have a lot of depth here. Mahopac has more depth than they do. Can they run the ball efficiently? It's going to be real interesting, but I am going to go with Harrison. I think Harrison showed a lot of grit and toughness, and that's something that, it might not be a quantity thing, but it's the quality thing. And Harrison, I do think, is going to be motivated. I think they're going to, again, up front, make some big-time plays on both the offensive line and defensive line, running the ball a little bit better to help their quarterback. This game will be close. I'm going to go with Harrison. All right, let's go to the next one. John Jay Cross River 1-0 at Eastchester, who's 0-1. Another very interesting game. Love the skill position that Cross River showed last week, making some big plays. Their quarterback had a really strong opening performance. To me, it's going to be how this offensive line handles Eastchester up front. I'm looking at Eastchester to see, hey, can they, again, the offense getting more and more comfortable, can the defense make some bigger plays this time around? I'm going to go with Eastchester. I think on the road, Cross River, this is going to be another tight game, but Eastchester is going to make enough plays on the defensive line, maybe force a turnover or two, and they're going to control the ball a little bit better than last week. So I think they'll control the ball. I think they won't give up as many big plays in the running game. Cross River has a lot of skill guys who can make plays, and if it gets into a passing battle, I think it benefits Cross River. I think Eastchester runs the ball more consistently. They win the game. I'm going with Eastchester. Let's go. Mamaroneck 0-0 at North Rockland. This is a AA performance league game, or AA game. There's a league game as well. Another interesting game here, but these two teams, rematch from last year, close game for a while. This was almost an opportunity for North Rockland to upset Mamaroneck, that super team right there, but Mamaroneck pulled away. So many guys to replace on Mamaroneck. I'm going to go with North Rockland. Mamaroneck on the road against a North Rockland team that can run the ball very well, and Mamaroneck has a linebacking core that they can run with North Rockland. The question I have is offensively. So many guys to replace the skill position, placing the quarterback, placing your starting running back. This offense might take a little bit of time to get going. North Rockland's defense had a strong performance last week. I'm going with North Rockland. And finally, the game of the week is an A game. Clarkstown South 0-0 at Somers, who's 0-1. Non-league game. Can Clarkstown South pull off the upset? They have been so strong these last few years, winning a whole bunch of games. They were one of the #1 seeds last year. So many guys to replace. So much conversation about Clarkstown South that, hey, these guys are talented dudes coming up. They were just behind a senior player. And so now it's their time to shine. How does Somers respond after such a tough loss? A game that they should have won. Again, maybe people wouldn't think that before, but during the game at the end, Somers had the opportunity to win. Does this linger and carry over? My pick, I'm going with Somers. I think Somers does rebound. I think they run the ball well. Clarkstown South, if this was later in the season, might be a little bit different, right? But because it's a week 0 game for them, on the road at Somers motivated by, hey, we can play with the best of them. I think Somers executes better this time. They don't give up as many big plays in the passing game this time, and Somers wins this game. All right, everyone. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Really appreciate you guys as always. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all very soon.